Hello, weirdos. We today are doing a hat because my hair decided to not cooperate. Oh gosh, just not laying right and it's just pissing me off. But guess who we got? We got the baby. Here she is. There you are. Yeah, you cute baby. Yeah, you know how we talk about the books that we're filming in this video? So this video is going to be about my reactions to the quarterfinals for the BookTube prize. So I read the nonfiction group AB, I believe. Let me double check that on my notes because I took notes. Yeah, group B. My initial thoughts going into this group was not super positive. Not that it was negative either, but I was just like, I'm not super jazzed about any of these books. Some of these books seem interesting, but I don't know if I would have picked any of them up independently. The one thing that I was happy to see was that I had a repeat book in Fuzz by Mary Roach. So I was like, ooh, I only have to read 5 books this time. So woohoo! Let's just cut the bullshit and talk about the books. So you guys, everybody does a breakdown into how the BookTube prize works. I'm not going to do that because I'm trying to film this video in 15 minutes because my parents are making dinner and I want to eat because I'm kind of hungry. So I'm just going to get straight into the ranking system. So, we rank the books 6 to 1, 6 being the worst, 1 being the first. One thing you're not allowed to do is DNF, and you have to finish all of them and you have to rank all of them. You can't have 2 in one spot. So it's kind of hard for me, but that's okay. So the first book is that I ranked 6th, so the worst one. Doesn't have to be the worst one, just didn't work. Oh look, BookTube prize from last year. Anyway, and that is A Ghost in the Throat. This is by Doriani Gorta. This book was just not for me. I think I've come to realize that memoirs by poets just really aren't for me. I haven't really gotten along with many of them. They are written well. This one is written beautifully, beautiful to read. I just felt like the actual substance in it wasn't a lot. And I just kind of was sitting there and being like, oh, I have to read this today. I don't want to read this. Because I just was so bored throughout the entire thing, which is weird because I should be interested in it. Because the author, Dorian, it's about her experience pregnancy and becoming a new mother and ruminating on that. But while this is all happening, she gets obsessed over this poet who's been long dead, and so she starts researching voraciously. And which is something that I fall into those spirals too, and I really like history and just get caught up in random ass shit in history. So you'd think I should like that, but I just felt so bored. I was like, okay, where is the plot? I feel like this is just more meandering around and there's no rhyme or reason to what we're seeing when or what we're talking about when. And that's kind of what made it a little bit off-putting to me. She wrote a keen at the end and I just didn't have the patience for it. I was like, I'm done. I want to finish this book. It was the last book that I had to read for the prize and I was just done. To be fair, there's a lot of crazy changing things in my life right now, like finding a job. So that is a whole thing that is causing chaos. So I just didn't have time to put my mental energy into reading this book and to reading that poem at the end. I was like, I got to the end of this book. The next book that I ranked 5th, I think is still a good book. And that is Islands of Abandonment. This is by Cal Flynn. I really like the idea behind this book. This is a book where Cal Flynn is talking about all of these places that have been abandoned by humans and reclaimed by nature. It's really, really interesting. I really enjoyed hearing the aspects of describing the areas, getting to know more about the nature things. I really like that stuff. I was very curious about it. The reason this is 5th is because Cal Flynn tends to go on these just philosophical rants about what this means for humanity and stuff like that. And I just was like, I had no patience for it. I was like, stop. I was like, I don't care. Can we please move on to the next place? Or can we please just tell me about these cows' breeding habits? Thank you. I don't care. I do not care why, about why you are like reminiscing on humanity and like what this means. And I just was very off put by that portion of the book. And it wasn't like a chapter and then Kathleen moved on from that. It was injected into every single chapter. It was about every single thing. And I was like, oh my God, stop. Yeah. So I really wanted to like this book. I still liked it. But it just, and maybe it's a me thing. Philosophy is not for me. I'm not a philosophical person, but I have a very small tolerance for philosophy. I can take it in teeny chunks. It was too much. And maybe some people will disagree with me and think that it was fine. It was too much for me, personally. So that's kind of how I felt about that. The next book that I ranked was All the Frequent Troubles of Our Days. This is by Rebecca Donner. I am so peeved by books like this getting into the BookTube prize. I'm not gonna lie. That specifically is books about World War II that are about spies. I just don't get it, okay? It is something that is not interesting for me to read about. I think spies in general, very, very boring. I don't like reading about spies and espionage. It's just not for me. It's not something that I am attracted to or find interesting, like, at all. So that's kind of why it's kind of like points deducted from this already because of that. And then it's also set in like World War II. And I just don't like to read books about World War II because it can be very intense for me, very, very triggering for me. So I try to avoid it, which is kind of why books about spies are like great, because you don't actually hear a lot of the specific horrors of the Holocaust. Although that wasn't quite escaped in this book, which was not great for me. Oh my God, I gotta, my hair's not wanting to cooperate. Do you want to say hi? Yeah, she's just like, I can see you're distressed. Let me lick your face. Do you want to lick my face? You need a bath. Yes, you do. I'll give you one later. I know you'll be mad, but I'll give you a bath later. Come here. Come here. Let's sit on my lap. Yeah. Just curl up. Yeah, cute. So that being said, the actual writing of this book was very snappy, kept you engaged, kept me want to keep reading. It was really hard for me to push past the like subject material. That's kind of why it's sitting at 4th, because I do think it's really well written. And it's written in a way that will kind of bridge the gap between the fiction to nonfiction readers. So people who are just starting to get into nonfiction and are interested in the subject, this might be a super good book for you to read. It's just not one for me because I just don't, it's just the subject material, not for me. I'm sorry. It's just not, oh God. And that's kind of like why I'm tired of like books getting into the prize, because there's a book last year, and I think a book before that were all about spies in World War II. And I was like, how many books can there be written possibly about spies in World War II? Please tell me. Or like, if you're gonna do it, let's take a different angle. Let's look at like spies not in Europe. Can we talk about spies working other places? Like, can we hear more about the Pacific conflict rather than like just the Nazis? Yeah. So that being said, I think it was quite an interesting and compelling story. Maybe y'all tell me I'm wrong, but that's just me. So in third, so these are all the books now that I want to continue on to the next round. So in third place, the one I ranked third is American Baby. This is by Gabrielle Glasser. Heart-wrenching fucking story, man. Okay, this woman gets pregnant. She's 16. She desperately wants to keep the baby, but it's like the 50s, I think it is. Maybe a little bit earlier. Wait, can I think about that? I think it's just after World War II. That's what it is. So late 1940s. She gets pregnant. The baby daddy wants to stay involved. They actually wind up getting married. And they have a growing family. But having to hear her go through how much the court was forcing her to get rid of her child is really sad and really, really heartbreaking and hard to read at times. And then hearing about the adopted child like feeling so disconnected and how upset his parents with his feelings. And another thing that I think is done really, really well in this book is sort of explaining the adoption process and the psychology that goes behind like what it is like for an adoptive parent to receive a child and to undergo those like changing stages, like where a child is wanting to know more about their history, who they come from, all of that. And it does it with like all adoption parties involved. So it does really well explaining like what the child in the adoption process goes through as they grow up. What are the normal things? Like, you know, for instance, it's very normal for a child to want to know, like, why didn't my parents want me? Why didn't my biological parents, my birth parents, want me? And it's very normal for them to ask the adoptive parents about that. It's very normal for them to be seeking that information. And sometimes the adoptive parents can interpret that as a rejection. But it's not a rejection. They still want the parents. They just want to know, like, their origins. It's just a desire to know their origin stories. And there's a lot psychology going on behind there. And it does that for the birth parents too, and their sort of experience going through the adoption process, which I really, really enjoyed because I have never been a part of an adoption process. My parents had me naturally. I'm my parents' biological child. So it's something, like, while I have had like adoptive friends, and I do have adoptive friends, it's just never been a experience that I have directly understood. So I really liked that explanation. And I felt like, as someone who possibly maybe will adopt one day, it would be very, very great to like know. And I felt like it was very, very informative, very, very sad. However, what kind of makes it like this low, I guess? It's not low. I wanted to go to the next round. And depending on other people's reaction, I think it might. The reason why I kind of put it so low is because the entire time I had this nagging feeling in the back of my head that's like, okay, but what about the horrors of adoptions for X, Y, or Z? Specifically people of color and Native Americans in America. Because maybe it's just because I've been reading stories and stuff like that, or hearing stories specifically about like the Native American piece and the absolute decimation that happens with that, that I have been like kind of sensitive to it lately. Yeah, and that being said, it's not that it's not mentioned in this book. There are a few parts. Come here. There are a few parts where it is mentioned and it is talked about like what the people of color and like and Native American kids go through and that whole process. I just kind of wanted it a bit more. I don't know if it's necessarily out of the scope, but to me it was kind of something like nagging in the back of my mind that I couldn't really put away and put on the shelf while reading this, especially because this is touting itself as like the story of American adoption. Maybe just like the marketing needed to be a little bit different, but it just was something nagging in the back of my brain that I really couldn't divorce from the story at all. Yeah, so that is American Baby. The next one is Fuzz. This is by Mary Roach. I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about this book because I thought it was very very whimsical, but also very like dark at times. If you want to know a lot of my thoughts, you can look at my previous BookTube prize video. I will link it down because I talk about it more in there. Fortunately, most of that video is me ranting about the Enlightenment because fuck that book. I will always be mad that that book was put into this prize. But yeah, Mary Roach just basically talks about, the subtitle for this book, Fuzz, is When Nature Breaks the Law. So there tends to be just some more comedy in that. So it talks about everything from what happens when like rabbits are jaywalking to like when bears murder people. Maybe murder is too strong of a word. When bears maul people, you know, that sort of thing. So I thought it was very, very interesting. I liked hearing all of her different stories about how she was like went through trainings to learn about this stuff, the research she went on. I think that's part of the strength in a lot of Mary Roach's writing. Yeah, so go to the video if you want a little bit more in-depth thoughts. Yeah, so that's number 2. And do you want to come here? Do you want to come here? Ugh. Are you gonna help me? Are you gonna help me talk about the last one? So the last one is The Groundbreaking. This is by Scott Ellsworth. I was gonna say something really different. Oh my god. So this is all about the Tulsa Race Massacre. What I really liked at the beginning is that it takes you through kind of like almost like a secondhand first person perspective. Maybe not first person, maybe like more like third person, but it takes you through the perspective of what actually happened on that day. I would have liked that first chapter to be expanded a little bit more. It is one of the longest chapters in the book, but I felt like it's just so much information coming at you like so quickly that you just needed more. And then the rest of it is talking about the cover-up that happened to the massacre. So how mainly white people would suppress the knowledge of this massacre, that there even was an affluent Black Wall Street in Tulsa, and then the subsequent fights for funding and finding the bodies that were buried. That I just felt in my bones, that the frustration that goes through not only trying to secure funding and find funding, but also just trying to make people believe that there were bodies buried and trying to find people, because by the time that they were trying to dig up bodies, a lot of people were dead. Or they got stuck in bureaucratic roadblocks and red tape that just made it extremely frustrating and hard to just locate these bodies. I thought it was very entertaining, very well written as well, and it just made it very, very compelling. And the first chapter especially, if nothing else, read the first chapter of this book, because it just was a very quick way to get a lot of information as to what exactly happened. Yeah, so if you don't want to read a whole book about it, you just want like a kind of a condensed version, just read the first chapter of the groundbreaking, not the preface, the first chapter, because that was very, you want to come up here? This is what she does. This is what she does. She just does it. And then she just like that. She'll just hang out. So she'll just be like this, little rat tail. Those are the 6 books. Those are my rankings. Let me know in the comments down below if you participated in the prize. If you did, what books did you read? If not, just leave a little like smiley face. Actually, no, leave a little dog emoji if you've gotten this far in the video. I'm sorry. This is the first time she's done this on camera. It's just hilarious. She does this literally all the time, but she doesn't typically do it when I'm sitting, and I'm sitting right now. All right, I have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.